In June of 2011, Neil Gaiman hinted to fans on Twitter that he was thinking of and perhaps making steps towards writing a sequel to his beloved fantasy book published in 2001, American Gods. For fans of the book and Neil's writing in general, this was music to their ears, and for good reason. American Gods is in a league of its own. It's a book that's been praised for its mix of fantasy, mystery, and horror, and it's a book that's crammed full of social commentary, all disguised as fantasy and mythology combined. It's not only hard to describe, but to some, hard to love. This polarization has given it a cult following of dedicated fans. So when he also told MTV at around this time, "I've been planning to do a second American Gods book since the first American Gods book. What I basically have right now is a box full of stuff, things to go in it. I always knew there was going to be more story." You can bet that the excitement and hope for a second American Gods book escalated. But this was early days though. The book had just been picked up by HBO to do a show, but it wasn't actually going to air until 2017. 6 years later, after complications with writers at HBO, instead it was picked up by Starz. So fast forward to 2022, the TV series adaptation has finished and sadly cancelled after 3 seasons. And we're no closer to a sequel to the first American Gods book 11 years after the first book was published, which is a really long time, causing fans to grasp onto any kind of information they can to see if the next book will ever see the light of day. This kind of response isn't just reserved for Neil Gaiman though, and as far as fans go, he has it pretty good. Take a look at the Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin, who has been actually working on the next book in the series titled The Winds of Winter for almost 11 years. A Dance with Dragons, the book that came before The Winds of Winter, took 6 years to write. And in an interview with The Guardian in 2011, just before A Dance with Dragons was released, Martin hoped that the last 2 books would go a little quicker than this one has, and estimated that it would take 3 years to finish the next one at a good pace. 11 years later and things don't quite look so good. Which begs the question, how long is too long to wait? Generally speaking, most authors don't wait 11 years before they write the next book in a series or a potential book in a series like Gaiman and Martin, but there's something to be said for that waiting period before a new book releases. It gives you a sense of excitement. And if you didn't have to wait that long, then you might just binge the books and they just wouldn't feel quite as special. Prolific authors have their place, but sometimes when series are released quickly, it just doesn't feel that special. There's nothing to wait for, to plan for, and I don't know about you, but when I receive a book that I haven't had to wait for, there's no inherent feeling of a need to read it quickly. They just go on my shelf and sit there until I kind of feel like reading them. Having said this, there is such a thing as waiting too long. In the case of George R.R. Martin, the weight and sheer popularity of the Game of Thrones series has led fans to not only feeling disappointed by the wait, but straight up resenting Martin as a result. Either that or just straight up feeling indifferent to a series that you were once really excited about. Speaking from experience, it's understandable for fans to be disappointed, especially if they don't know exactly when a book is going to be released. And in the case of Martin and Gaiman, that could still be a number of years. But as I said earlier, Neil has it pretty good as far as fans go. The amount of time we have waited for an American Gods sequel equals the amount of time we've been waiting for The Winds of Winter, but the difference is Neil hinted at writing a second American Gods book, whereas Martin is writing a series. Martin has also been known to overpromise, telling fans he'll write books quicker than he realistically can, and as time has gone on, he's also increased the length of the last 2 books substantially. But does the wait justify the ridicule, onslaught, and general toxicity of some of the Game of Thrones community? Are fans owed the next book for investing in Martin and the Game of Thrones series? Well, in the words of Neil Gaiman, George R.R. Martin is not your bitch. Writers don't actually owe readers anything. Like Gaiman, Martin has been working on other projects, writing other things, and has to dedicate a lot of time to his current commitments. It's also kind of good for him to have a life, you know? Just like Neil, who, albeit more casually, explains, "I would love to write another American Gods book, but I've got several projects that need to be finished first. And also there's things that need to be done, and things that need to be made. And all I know is at the moment I say this is what I'm doing, everything is going to change. So I'd rather not announce it, and I'd rather quietly do it at some point and tell everybody it's happening." In general, there's something to be said for authors keeping releases to themselves until they're actually ready to be published. Neil has been careful here. He understands what's happened to Martin and he would rather avoid it happening to him as well. And honestly, I would rather avoid that happening also. It's really hard waiting for a release, and it's even harder when you don't know when it's coming. Plus, the writing process can take years. Other projects come up, and writers need to enjoy the process of writing their book, otherwise they might produce something that fans hate anyway. In the case of Martin, he's repeatedly said that he's not enjoying the writing process because of the way fans are treating him. I've had fun at certain points, but perhaps less fun as it got late. Yes, it's wonderful to have thousands of people eagerly waiting for the book to come out. I just wish they'd be a little less vituperative when they write their emails. This kind of backlash can only make the writing process longer and more painful for the writer, especially on top of the reception of the series. Over the past year or so, I've started pre-ordering books from series that I've really enjoyed, and the wait for these books has been part of the excitement. But there is something to be said for a wait that perhaps feels too short or too long. There's a magic amount of time that each person has to wait before something becomes not exciting anymore. But perhaps that's also part of the beauty of it. Because if you're truly excited for something, overhyping it becomes easy, and the satisfaction you gain from reading it is probably not what you hoped for. I think there's something to be said for waiting with intention. Sure, we can be excited about a new release that's coming out, but by obsessing over it, we might be ruining the experience of reading it. I truly believe this is why some book-to-film adaptations simply flop. Not because they're inherently bad, although some are, but because fans of the book have such incredibly high expectations. It's one of the reasons why watching City of Ember 19 years after the book was released was enjoyable and honestly kind of comforting. Had I watched it soon after reading the book, I'd probably have felt different. When a book you've read and loved feels raw, even just a couple of years after reading it, your expectations are going to be incredibly high for whatever comes next. You may even feel some kind of ownership over the characters or the plot. But by waiting a healthy amount of time in between book releases, the author has the freedom to go in a different direction within the book without upsetting fans. They also have the time to peruse other projects, and expectations are generally lowered because of it. It's probably why it took Suzanne Collins almost 10 years to release a prequel to the Hunger Games series, because fans had enough time between the books and the films to detach and come back fresh. Although some would say even that was too long because the release of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes almost went under the radar. So if you're waiting for a book release right now, enjoy that excitement while you can, let the author do their thing, and in the meantime, read more books.